she just keeps holding on to the baby, the doctor. And she says, okay, who's going to cut the cord? And then the mom was like, oh, no. We're doing delayed cord clamping. And she said, I'm not handing you your baby until we clamp this cord. I'm Kayla Heater, follower of Jesus, wife and mother of 6 children, Christian childbirth educator and doula, and your host of the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, where we share God-centered birth stories, evidence-based birth education, and our pursuit of surrendering our birth plans to God. Let's get started. Happy Monday, everybody, or whenever you are listening to this. I realize it's not Monday for everybody, but I hope your week is off to a wonderful start. It was almost 90 degrees here today in Greensboro, and my kids decided to make a lemonade stand, which was fun. They are trying to raise money to go to summer camp, and so they decided to make some fresh squeezed lemonade, and then they decided to make some chocolate chip cookies to sell with it. So they got home from church and they ate lunch and went straight to work. And we're outside on the street all afternoon selling stuff. And I think they did a pretty decent job. They made like $40. So, which I think is pretty good for a kid's stand. So I hope you guys all enjoyed the warm weather as well. I just got back from teaching childbirth class. Love teaching that class. It is so much fun. And we only have 1 week left, which is hard to believe. But I will be teaching another class later at the end of this summer. So if you are local and you're having a fall baby, maybe even December, sometimes early December babies, we can sneak into that class. So if you're having a fall baby, your September, October, November due dates, I would love to teach you your childbirth class here in person in the Triad. So just reach out to me. We'll be meeting mostly in August. So let me know. I would love to be your teacher. So I told you last week on the podcast, gosh, my memory is not working great, that I would put a question box in my Instagram stories a couple times this week to see if anybody asked a question that I would answer right here on the introduction to this episode. So because today's episode is actually a little bit shorter in length, I felt like I could take a little bit longer on the intro and answer some of the questions that you guys asked. So I'm going to read the questions. I'm not going to do every single one, but I am going to do 3. Okay. First says, do you have advice for moms with prolapse who want more babies? Yes, I do. Have more babies. First of all, always have more babies. It's always my advice. I don't know what prolapse you're necessarily referring to because there's different types of prolapse, uterine prolapse and bladder prolapse and different things like that. But all essentially, the advice would be pretty much the same for any prolapse that you're dealing with. Number 1, hands down, absolutely see and work with a pelvic floor physical therapist right now for prolapse and throughout your pregnancy and postpartum for your next baby as well. They would be your number 1 resource to help support you during that time. They can really help improve any symptoms you're having and just increase support, and they can really reduce the risk for any kind of progression in that area. Absolutely. So that's like my number 1 is stick with a pelvic floor PT for sure. Also, if you can space out your babies a little bit further, if that's possible, that can help healing like all the pelvic tissues down there in between babies. It would reduce the risk of getting worse with your next baby if there was more space in between. Also, in terms of like when you get pregnant and you have another baby again, prevent any sort of like straining. So like any sort of like pushing with constipation or like really heavy lifting, or like if you get like bronchitis or something, trying to like tackle that coughing and cold and allergy type stuff that can really mess with everything down there. But also like, I would say like besides the pelvic floor PT, the best advice would be like once you're actually having your baby to go into labor spontaneously. Don't do any kind of like coached pushing. Just like be in a better pushing position. So like an upright position would be better so that gravity's on your side so that you can push your baby out naturally. And I would avoid like an epidural where you wouldn't be able to like feel how you're pushing and you would be on your back because all those things can really contribute to prolapse. So I would say try to have like an unmedicated labor that you go into spontaneously. So like no Pitocin, none of that kind of stuff. And one where you can push like at will and as your body's telling to and how your body's telling to so that you're not going to need like, any sort of assisted delivery, like no forceps, no vacuum, no episiotomy, stuff like that. Okay. Second question. How can nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle choices before pregnancy impact labor and birth? That's a great question. I would say if you didn't plan on getting pregnant and you just, became pregnant and you weren't thinking about any of that stuff beforehand, then don't worry. There's still hope and time for you to work on those things during pregnancy. But yes, working on them before pregnancy can be that much more helpful and will give you that much more time. So things like your strength and your endurance. So like getting like to a place in exercise to the point where you'll be able to endure like long physical feats, because that is essentially what labor is, especially for a first-time mom. First labors are usually like 24 hours long on average. So making sure that you're able to have like the physical endurance to go that long. We always say prepping for labor is like prepping for a marathon. So you want to get your body in the place where it can endure labor for that period of time. Also just like your core strength and your ability to like do squats and lunges and stuff like that, that can help make sure baby's nice and aligned going into pregnancy and then continuing those things in pregnancy going into labor, because an aligned baby who's in a good position and has like plenty of space in the pelvis is going to make for a smoother labor and smoother delivery. Also seeing a chiropractor before and especially during pregnancy is going to help with that just as much. Nutrition wise, I would also say like making sure that you've got some really good vitamins and minerals that's going to contribute to your collagen strength, which is going to play a factor in like your skin's ability to stretch and not tear, like your muscle function, like making sure your uterus is a muscle, right? And so when it is squeezing and contracting in labor, better muscle function equals better efficiency in labor. And sometimes those things take a really long time to build up, especially also like for your blood volume, right? Like your blood volume dramatically increases during pregnancy. And so having extra stores of iron and B12 and folate, things like that, because that can take a while to build up and only gets more so when you're already pregnant. So if you have a good like reserve of those before you're pregnant, then it won't be as hard to like keep up with managing that during pregnancy instead of like starting off pregnancy depleted and then not being able to catch up. Because you want to make sure your iron levels are really great. It'll help you feel better for your pregnancy and then will help with like any kind of blood loss after you deliver the baby. So yes, it's not a total loss if like you weren't paying as much attention to your nutrition and exercise and stuff before pregnancy, but it's definitely only going to be that much more beneficial for you if you are. So like the longer you've been prepping to become pregnant, it will also help increase your chances of getting and staying pregnant too, just making sure you're paying attention to those lifestyle choices, nutrition, exercise, etc. Last question, and this is more of a fun one. This question says, how do you do it all? With a laughing smiley emoji. You're my role model. that is really fun and sweet. And I love that. How do I do it all? Well, I don't do it all. First of all, I fail in many ways, many times a day. And the Lord gives us grace for that. And I'm very appreciative of his new mercies every morning. I will say I've had to intentionally build margin into my life so that I'm not always doing it all, because that will burn you out very quickly. But I also have had to develop, with 6 kids, homeschooling and running this podcast and having my birth doula clients and teaching my class and, friends and church and family and life. Yes, it is a lot running a household and doing all this, but I've had to really be very intentional about the different rhythms and routines in my life and to simplify things too and to not overcomplicate them. So anytime I find an area that's like causing me stress, I have to like sit back and reflect and think like, what can I do about this? How can I make this more streamlined? How can I make this simpler? Like, how can I make this less stressful? And sometimes that means just getting rid of it, period. I do that a lot with any toys lying around the house. I'll tell you that. My kids will tell you I am not afraid to pick up whatever is on the floor and just chuck it in the trash. No hard feelings. I just do it. But my husband and I actually have a weekly coaches meeting is what we call it. We refer to our family as a family team. My husband and I are the coaches and our children are the players, I guess. They are on our team and we all work together to accomplish one goal. And so as coaches, we meet with each other weekly and talk about things like that, talk about stress points, talk about things that aren't working and how we can shift them to make them work better and strategize and stuff like that. And sometimes it takes like 30 minutes and sometimes it takes like an hour, but we just carve out, 30 minutes to an hour each week just to sit with each other and talk about those types of things to make sure that things continue to run smoothly. And it's very, very helpful. So I don't do it all. I really don't. But I do juggle a lot, but I try to do it in a way that keeps things simple and less stressful and more enjoyable. Also efficient. I'm really big on efficiency. It's like my number one pet peeve is inefficiency. And the Lord has had to work with me a lot in that area. But to me, I'm just sort of the mentality of if it can be done faster and better, then why not? But again, yes, I know that you can't apply that to every single situation. But when I'm trying to quote unquote do it all, it helps for sure. So I hope that all made sense. I put some, question boxes on Instagram a couple times this week and just said, hey, ask me a question and I'll answer it in my intro. I'm sorry if I didn't get to everybody's questions, but I also don't want the intro to be as long as the episode itself is. So I'll do it again. Maybe I'll just make this like regular if I have a shorter episode coming up where we can have a little bit longer of an intro, then I'll do these Q&As instead of waiting for like one big Q&A episode. Hope you enjoyed it. I'll do it again at some point. But now let's jump into this week's very unique episode of Doula Diaries, 2nd edition. Today, we'll dive into 3 more birth stories from my time as a doula. I'll walk you through what it was like for me to support these moms during their labors. First up is the story of the very first birth I ever attended as a doula in training and the old school doctor whose routines I found absurd. Next, a long labor of a long gestation pregnancy that could have easily ended in a C-section had this mama chosen an OB for her provider. But thankfully, her midwives were trying to keep their C-section rate low. But I did see firsthand how one seemingly small intervention can lead to the cascade of interventions. Lastly, I'll tell the story of my first repeat client who I was supposed to meet at the hospital during her unexpectedly early labor, But instead, I had to turn around and drive to her house because her baby was beyond ready to be born. Okay, we are back for the second edition of Doula Diaries. We did this back in the fall, I think. Someone gave me the suggestion or the request of sharing some of my birth stories from the doula's perspective. And we did it. We did an episode. I shared 3 different stories and it was a hit. And lots of people said they really liked it and they wanted more of them. So your long-awaited second edition Doula Diaries episode is here. So I'm just going to take you back and share 3 different birth stories from my perspective as a doula. And if you missed the first one, we can link that one in the show notes so you can go back and listen to the first edition of that. But without further ado, here we go. Okay, I'm going to share the story about the very first birth I ever attended as a birth doula. I guess I was technically a shadowing doula. I was in training. So it was literally my first birth I'd ever been to besides my own. But this was the first time I was doing it, from the other side as like a support person. And I was beyond excited. So I was, again, the shadowing doula. I wasn't like the main doula. And I was like on pins and needles on call, waiting like to go in. Well, I get the call that this mom had high blood pressure and they wanted to induce her at 37 weeks. And again, this was my very first time, my dipping my toe in the water. So I call my mom over to my house to watch my baby. And I'm like, hey, just be here. That way I can run out the door at a moment's notice. She's like, okay. So she's all excited too. She comes over and we're waiting. I'm waiting to get the call to go in. Well, turns out this mom, they had her on Pitocin, and I don't know why they didn't start with Cytotec or anything, but they had her on Pitocin for a day and a half and she nothing, no contractions, no progress, no cervical change, nothing. Basically her body was, just obviously not ready to have a baby. And so her main doula, not me, but her actual doula suggested that she go home and go home and be put on bed rest essentially for her blood pressure. And I don't remember because this was 11 years ago. I don't know if there was a back and forth fight about that. I imagine that there was, if hospital staff wanted her to stay or if she had to sign an AMA, I don't know. But she went home and was put on bed rest essentially until she went into labor on her own or until her blood pressure got too dangerously high. I guess it wasn't as dangerous. I don't have exact numbers because this was 11 years ago. And I also didn't really know what I needed to record back then. So anyways, a couple weeks later, she's 39 weeks and some change, and her blood pressure goes up again to a level that nobody was comfortable with. And so she went back to the hospital for induction try number 2. This time it worked. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but I was so disappointed the first time when she was 37 weeks and I didn't get to go in because it was my first birth. But then the second time, I remember telling my mom, maybe don't come over yet because I don't know when I'm actually going to leave. I've learned a lot since then, but I did eventually get called into the birth. It was in the middle of the night. So my husband was home and we went. And again, I'm the shadowing doula, right? And so by the time I got there, she actually already was getting an epidural, which I don't know if that was the plan or not. Again, this one's fuzzy, but I do want to tell you what I remember vividly about this first birth experience. So I had just, started reading all my books for training to be a doula and starting, to learn all about physiological birth and all these things. Well, I had recently learned about delayed cord clamping, which to me seems like a no-brainer now, but this was 11 years ago. And this mom had put on her birth plan that she wanted to do delayed cord clamping. And again, I was the shadow doula, so let me just reiterate that. But she's pushing out the baby. I'm fascinated because this is my very first birth. I'm actually holding one of her legs. And I'm like just amazed at the whole process. I don't know, when you witness a miracle, you're just like in a space, right? In a certain headspace. So the baby comes out, and the doctor, who apparently is a very old school doctor, she's holding the baby. And of course, everyone's all excited. And we're waiting for this moment where they put the baby on the mom's chest, right? That's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to pick the baby up and put it on the mom's chest. That's what happened to me even the year before at the same hospital. And she doesn't do it. She just keeps holding on to the baby, the doctor. And she says, okay, who's going to cut the cord? And then the mom was like, oh, no. We're doing delayed cord clamping. And she said something along the lines of delayed cord clamping isn't real, or it doesn't have any benefit, or it doesn't work. I don't know, whatever doctor excuse she gave. And she said, so if you want to delay it, that's fine. Like, that's your choice. She said, but I'm not handing you your baby until we clamp this cord. And so she said, your baby is going to get cold. So you can either have delayed cord clamping and a cold baby, or you can clamp this cord and I'll give you your baby. And I was just like, every thing I'd heard about OBs in the last, however many weeks or months of training, research, books, I was like, confirmed. It was all just confirmed in that moment. And because obviously that's not true, right? Give the woman her baby. But here's me, super timid, first time shadow doula, first birth I've ever been to. So what was I going to do? Jump in there and be like, actually, you're wrong here. Take your baby. No, I just sat back and watched with tension of what's going to happen? Who's going to say it? Who's going to do what? I thought the doula there would intervene and advocate. She did not. I don't want to speak badly about anybody, but that would have been an opportunity and a moment to do that. And Lord knows if I was ever at a birth again where that was the situation and I was the doula, you bet I would have been jumping in there and being like, absolutely not. But anyways, so the mom, feeling super vulnerable, the dad having no idea this is his first baby, they were just like, okay, and cut the cord. Oh man, I'll just never forget that. I don't know if that doctor's practicing anymore. I hope she's not practicing anymore. She was an older doctor 12 years ago or 11 years ago. So hopefully she's not practicing anymore, but oh my goodness. So no, that baby did not get delayed cord clamping. The mom did not get the immediate skin to skin. It was tragic. So anyways, that's what I remember most about my very first birth I ever went to is the doctor claiming that delayed cord clamping had no benefit. Mind was blown on my very first birth. But also it was sort of the moment where I was like, I'm going to do this job and I'm going to love this job and I will be good at it. I felt like in that moment, I couldn't say anything as the shadow doula because I wasn't supposed to be there to simply observe and not interact. But you better believe I got a lot more interactive when they were my actual clients. Okay, next story. So this was also earlier in my doula years. I think I'd been doing it for around a year or so at that point. I had a mom. She went all the way to 42 weeks. Bless her. She was a first-time mom. And she had kind of had a little bit of prodromal-y stuff leading up to it, but nothing that ever really kicked into gear. But finally, the night of 42 weeks, early labor started. I met her at the hospital around 2:00 in the morning. And we went through triage and she was 2 centimeters. And so we did the whole walk around and wait and all that kind of stuff to see, because they didn't send her home, but they basically said you're not quite far along enough to be here. So we did all the things to try and keep going. And the next time they checked her, she was 4 centimeters. And so we got in the door essentially. So once we got to the room, she went through all the questions and all the here's all the stuff you need to know. Meanwhile, she's deep in labor, right? And having all these contractions. So a midwife comes in like a hospital midwife comes in and she's like, well, I want to give you a membrane sweep and see if we can like get things going like even more, like kick this into active labor because she was still in early labor at the time. So they do a membrane sweep and just conveniently enough, her water breaks during the sweep. And again, who am I to say that wasn't the Lord's will? I don't know. But it just seemed awfully convenient to me that she was trying to hurry her labor along and her water happened to break during this sweep. You try to assume the best about everybody, but I have been in the birth world long enough now to know that as much as I want to assume the best about everybody, they do not always have the best intentions. So her water breaks and suddenly that, it does kick her labor like into more of an active labor gear and the contractions get more intense and closer together and everything they wanted. However, the baby was not thrilled with this situation. So of course she's hooked up to monitors, right? And so the baby was having decels during contractions and after, like they were lingering as well. The baby wasn't recovering very well from these contractions. And again, none of that happened until after they had broken her water. So suddenly, like, all these nurses are in there and everyone's trying to like change your position and do this and do that and a flood of people in the room. Like it was just like, very intense very quickly. Well, I do strongly believe that if it had been an OB, that they would have like pushed for a C-section in that moment. Because OB, like that's their specialty, right? They love to do surgery and that's what they're trained in. So there's that. But thankfully, we were working with midwives who I think were legitimately trying to keep a low C-section rate for themselves. And so instead, they gave her a shot of terbutaline to stop her contractions or slow her contractions down so that baby would have like longer recovery time between contractions to like help baby's heart rate, which worked to a point. But when she would have the contractions, it was still just like her heart rate was still dropping too low. So again, I do think an OB would have called a C-section, but instead the midwife said, well, let's do an amnio infusion, which is where they stick like a little catheter up into the uterus and they fill your uterus with saline solution. It's almost like an IV up to your uterus to sort of reinflate your uterus again and kind of like give you your water back essentially. And to get that compression off the cord to help the cord not be so compressed so that baby's heart rate is better. So to me, I'm just like, remember if we hadn't broken her water in the first place, none of this be happening. I always say in my class, I'm like, if the Lord hasn't broken your water yet, he probably has a reason. So, once you intervene though, once you get up there and sweep the membrane and intervene, it can lead to thing after thing after thing, which I learned in this birth. So now mom is hooked up to an amnio infusion and she had the terbutaline, which did slow her contractions some, but it didn't do enough of a job. And the midwife was convinced if we could give her an epidural and get her to relax, because the mom is anxious at this point, if we could get her to relax and her to calm down and everything that like the baby would too, essentially. My client, I think, was relieved to hear that her midwife said, you need an epidural for your baby's sake. Because she was going to try to do it unmedicated if she could. But I think in that moment, she was just like, oh, thank goodness. Okay. So anyways, so she ends up with an epidural. She gets a good nap in, which was good. But of course, what's going to happen? You gave her a shot of terbutaline, labor slows down. Now you have an epidural, labor's really slowing down. So what are they going to suggest? Ding, ding, ding. You guessed it, Pitocin. So now she's on Pitocin. So again, none of this we believe would have happened if she hadn't gotten that membrane sweep that broke her water or, could have been intentional to break her water. So here we are now, amnio infusion, and now we're hooked up to IV fluids too because we've got Pitocin going and we have an epidural and all the things. eventually we get to the point where it's time to push the baby out. Well, as she's pushing, baby is still just like not appreciating the compression of the cord when the baby's being pushed through the birth canal. So again, I believe an OB would have said, C-section, like, I don't like that heart rate. It's too dangerous, da, 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 da. But I really appreciated the midwife's call in this moment. Again, I think they were genuinely trying to make sure they had a low C-section rate, which was great. So the midwife said, okay, how about this? Instead of pushing every contraction, we'll just push every other contraction to give the baby more time to recover between contractions. And she was like, it'll take you twice as long, essentially, to push her out, but it will avoid a C-section, avoid surgery. And we were like, sounds good to us. I mean, she had an epidural, so she wasn't really in a lot of pain. So, doubling the time didn't really matter to her as much. So that's what we did. We did every other contraction of pushing until she pushed her baby out. And so lessons I learned in that particular birth were, yes, don't intervene unless you want more interventions to happen, because even the smallest intervention of a membrane sweep, especially if you're not totally sure of your provider's motives, can lead to lots of other interventions. But also that there are things you can do before jumping straight to a C-section. So like when your heart rate is decelling, or the baby's heart rate is decelling. So that's the first birth I'd ever seen an amnio infusion, like giving her water back. That was the first birth I had ever seen terbutaline used. That was the first birth and only birth I have ever seen where they had her push every other contraction for the sake of the baby's heart rate. So as much as I was upset that they broke her water, I was happy that they did everything they could to make sure she didn't have a C-section. So we were very, very grateful for that she got to have a vaginal birth after all of that stuff. Okay, third story. Here we go. I feel this feels like it's short and sweet this week, but maybe I also tend to not realize how long I've been talking. So that's a thing too, where I think I just talked for 2.5 minutes and I actually talked for 8. So hopefully that's what's happening here. So this was a mom who I'd actually worked with before. It was my very first repeat client, which was kind of cool when you get like a repeat, but this was my very first repeat client. So I had been with her at her last birth, which was great. So I like knew her and her husband and the fam and was familiar. Well, I wasn't even technically on call yet, which is, the Lord has a good way of working things out. So I wasn't even on call, but I was awake and I was nursing my baby. And I was in the nursery nursing my baby for the morning. It was about 7 a.m. And I get a text from this client. She's 36 and a half weeks. So again, not full term yet. I wasn't technically on call. So she texted me and she said, hey, I think I might be in labor or like early labor. She said, I've had some contractions for the last few hours and I had some bloody show. So I think things are starting. And I was like, wow, okay. Like we're not even 37 weeks, but okay. So I just like called my husband, give him the heads up. I can't remember if he was home or not already. But I gave him the heads up to like, hey, I'm probably heading to a birth today. And so I'm like, kind of, and we basically left it like she would update me when things got more intense later and like when we would go to the hospital. So that was like at 7, right? So at 8:20 a.m., she said, hey, things have really picked up. They've gotten really intense. We're going to go ahead and get ready and go to the hospital. Can you meet us there? And I'm like, yeah, of course. Absolutely. I'll meet you at the hospital. So that was a lot faster than any of us were anticipating, but it's fine. So like I ran downstairs, grabbed the car keys, grabbed my coffee and ran out the door. So I'm driving to the hospital and I get this call from her husband and he's like, hey, Kayla, turn around. He said, we're not going to make it to the hospital. We're having the baby here. We just called 911. Can you stay on the phone with us? And I was like, yep, absolutely. And so I was like, do you have towels? And he was like, yeah, I got towels. I'm like, okay, great. And so he put me on speakerphone, and I essentially got to walk him through catching his baby, which was really fun. So I can hear him, and he's like, oh, we have a head. Oh, okay. Oh, wait. All right. And then I hear the baby crying, and I'm like, way to go. Congratulations. It was the very first birth I ever missed. And I've only missed 3, I think, in all my years, but that happens with fast babies sometimes. So I'm driving. I had to turn around because I'd already passed their house to go to the hospital. So I turn around, driving towards their house. I hear, the sirens and stuff. So I'm like, okay, getting close. Because 911 wasn't there yet either. But then the fireman or the fire truck got there must have gotten there right before I did, because I can hear this all happening on the phone. So I walk into the house. There's 5 firefighters standing in her bedroom, kind of looking like, I don't really know what we're here for. She was turned around holding her baby, had her baby on her chest, and just laughing. And she was just like, I'm so sorry, I didn't. And I was just like, no, you're great. This was awesome. Fastest birth I've ever been to, because I missed it. And she's like, yeah, I know. It just, things picked up so fast, and we didn't realize how fast it was going to go, which was totally true. I think I took a couple of pictures on my phone or something in that moment of her being in the room, her bedroom with her baby on the floor. She had him right next to the bed on the floor. She was so sweet. Oh my goodness. But then they brought a stretcher in and put her up on the stretcher and said, okay, we're going to take you to the hospital now. And kept them connected, which was great. I'm pretty sure they stayed connected, her and the baby. I don't remember if they cut the cord or not. They might have. But then I followed the ambulance to the hospital, because they were going to go there and deliver the placenta and get her all set up for mother and baby. So we actually they took her straight to triage, I guess, maybe because she'd already had the baby. So we didn't have to go to labor and delivery. And in triage, her midwife came in and delivered the placenta, and I don't think she needed stitches, but got her all set up before we went to mother and baby. It was fast and furious. And it was her third baby. And the whole third babies are wild card babies. I see that true more often than not, honestly, because this birth went way faster than her other births for sure. Anywho, that was fun. So that's what I always teach about in my class too, because I have all these students, right? And they want to take a birth class and get educated. But sometimes people are like, well, I'm going to take this hospital birth class because I plan on having birth at the hospital. And then other people are like, well, I'm going to take this home birth class because I'm going to have a home birth. And I'm like, that's great. And I love that for you. But that's why I teach all locations in my birth class, because as I tell people, I'm like, you can plan to have your baby in whatever location you're going to plan on, but I cannot promise that that is where you're going to have your baby, right? The Lord has plans that are higher than our plans. There are hospital clients who end up having a baby in their bedroom or having a baby in the car or, things like that. And you have to be prepared for what is a physiological birth going to feel like, look like, what do I need to do in this moment if that's your case. And then I have, unfortunately, there are some home births that are planned home births that for whatever reason, usually exhaustion, end up in the hospital. And then at that point, they need to know okay, well, what to expect in the hospital, what's going to be coming at me, what do I want to do, not want to do, interventions, risks, benefits, etc. So that's why we teach about all of it in the class, because I'm like, at least all the information so that should you counter that situation, it won't be the first time you've ever heard of these things. It'll come back to you a lot quicker because you've heard about it before. Okay. I felt like that was really short, and maybe it was, but I will tell you, I've been to a few births this week. So hopefully have more births coming up in the queue for them, wanting to share their own birth stories. But if you liked this episode, great. Maybe we'll do a third edition If you're kind of like, pass, like, let's just keep doing the other, the other birth stories, then that's great too. Let me know. It lets me know whether or not to do one of these in the future. So if you liked it, send me a message or comment on the post link thing that we'll put on Instagram and just let us know, because there's a lot more stories where that came from. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. You can reach me at Surrendered Birth Services on Instagram or email me at contact@surrenderedbirthservices.com. Be sure not to miss an episode by hitting the follow button. Also, we'd love for you to leave a written review of the show so that more people's births and lives can be changed by the love of Jesus and the empowerment of accurate birth education. If you really enjoyed this episode in particular, please take a screenshot of it and post it to your Instagram story, tagging Surrendered Birth Services. If you would like to be a guest on the Surrendered Birth Stories podcast, please click the link in the episode show notes to fill out your interest form. Also, if you're interested in taking my childbirth classes, birth consultations, or having me as your birth doula, please click on the link in the show notes to take you to my website for online and in-person options. Just as a reminder, this show is not giving medical advice, so please continue to see your personal care provider as needs arise. We hope you have a great week, and remember, learn all that you can, make the best plans, and then leave it in God's hands. Hey guys, I'm recording an intro up here, so please don't yell. Okay, now you do.